All right, so these are the main knives that we use. And then I have another couple here. Let's put this out. That one you guys have seen a lot.
Paring knives.
Yeah, so this is the paring knife. I don't use it very much, but this one has a straight edge. Like, it feels pretty nice in hand. It's not as versatile as a paring knife with a little bit of a belly, because then you can actually chop with it, but I use that very seldomly. And then here is the petty knife that you guys have seen a lot of, and I've grown to use this knife for a lot of things, simply because it's so thin and it just goes through produce so well. You know, you can move so quickly with this knife. It has VG10 steel, which I believe this one also has. And I'm not a big knife person, but VG10, in my experience, just strikes the right balance. You know, like the pocket knife I carry, the Spyderco, that's also VG10. And it has decent rust resistance, although you see a little bit here because I'm not very careful putting these knives away. You see just right at the bolster, a little hint of rust. But for the most part, it holds an edge very well, easy to sharpen, it's not too hard of a steel, and just a good all-purpose stainless. So that's the petty knife, and I'll leave links to all these things, especially this one because I use it so much. And we'll just move this way. So here is the Deba knife that you brought back from Japan, even though I think we can find this on Amazon now. This one I think is really more of a cleaver, and they also use this style of Deba knife, this kind of chisel ground, little bit of a belly to fillet fish. And I've actually gotten more and more interested in that style of fish filleting versus using a traditional Western boning knife, which, you know, all the fillet knives we're used to are flexible. This one is a classic boning knife, F thick. This is a classic. You don't see this too much anymore. I got this like 20 years ago. But this is a boning knife as opposed to a fillet knife, which is usually a lot thinner. And they're all flexible, you know, so you can work your way around joints. But that's not how the Japanese do it. They use a chisel ground, very thick, heavy knife, and in my opinion, they get cleaner cuts. And if you see all this, because look, if you're cooking a piece of fish, you can go in blind, especially fluke. You know, people do this and they go in blind. You get a lot of feather cuts, and that's not acceptable if you're serving it in sashimi form. All right, and then here's a shun. This is, I think, a gift to your parents from somebody.
Yeah.
And we've been using it recently just because I've been too lazy to sharpen. So obviously they come very sharp out of the box. And this is a Sentoku knife, or at least their version of a Sentoku knife. Has a little bit of a belly, works well, it's very comfortable. Pretty thin blade, and is mainly used for vegetable prep. Okay. This one is my culinary school knife. It came with the original big kit that we have, you know, our equipment in. And this is like a Wusthof or Henkel style German, French chef's knife. And in my opinion, it's still the most comfortable in hand. Just the way, you know, there's a bit of weight to it. And how we train to cut things mostly is with the pinch grip. And with that type of grip, you know, all the contours, very ergonomical. You do this all day. And I know that this has kind of fallen out of fashion. People like the Japanese knives, and look, use whatever knife you're comfortable with.
Right.
But if I were back in a professional kitchen and I had to do a lot of rough chopping, breaking down crates of onions and potatoes and shit like that, this is a knife I'll be using, just because I'm so used to it. Has a nice belly. It's really made for that kind of roll cutting instead of the back slicing. Yeah, you really can't go wrong. Now, the only thing is they usually use a softer steel compared to most of the Japanese carbon knives. And it's low maintenance, easy to sharpen, but you will have to touch it up more. And that's a Global knife, kind of see it. I really abuse these knives. And this one I believe is the 9-inch chef's knife. And it's really modeled after a real chef's knife, like a French-German chef's knife. The steel is a little bit harder, and there's a lot of love-hate going on with Global knives. You know, people don't like the bolstering. You know, it's one piece, and I believe they put sand or something in the handle just to balance it. Personally, I feel it's not as comfortable chopping things all day as the traditional, you know, forged bolstering, but it works just fine. The advantage is you can get it very clean. You know, there's no edges here to trap food, and it works well. This holds an edge much longer than the German knives. And there's plenty of belly. You can do your roll cutting. And in terms of, when I say roll cutting, it usually means your tip is on the cutting board and you cut through. The other kind is back slicing, where you lift your whole knife off the board and then you slice, or you can go forward. It doesn't really matter, just as long as you have your hand in a claw, put the edge through the thing you're cutting. That's all that matters. And lastly, the Mac knife. Now, this is a stamped knife, and a lot of people say, well, it's not as nice as a forged knife. Again, all I care about is the edge and how thin it is and the ergonomics. I don't care if the knife is stamped, forged, folded over 1,000 times like a samurai sword. It makes no difference to me. If it makes a difference to you from an aesthetic point of view, or you just like knowing that there's more skill in the manufacturing of your blade, that's fine. But, you know, this one has these little dimples. It's meant to release food, like if you're slicing a cucumber. I personally am not a fan, especially on blades that are not 100% stainless, because water collects in them, and unless you go in through each dimple to wipe it down clean, you get little rust spots like here. And that's what happened in this knife, but it's still perfectly usable. This one also has one of the most uncomfortable ergos. I mean, you're talking about a really sharp edge right here. So if you're using the pinch grip, you know, it's just, but it still works well. And finally, you know, it's a Chinese kitchen. Here's a meat cleaver. Although I guess it's more of a vegetable cleaver, but Chinese people, Chinese cooks, they use this type of blade for everything. You know, they even fillet fish with this. They don't do a good job, but that's what they use. This, I believe, is a shun. Yep. And we have this to break through. See, it's all chipped. It's gonna take me forever to regrind a new edge.
Right.
But you know, you can use this to break through bone, and I think we use this on lobster quite a bit. And finally, a good pair of kitchen shears. These are from my culinary school days. That chef logo. I don't know what brand this is, but it works very well.
Yeah, it's one of my favorites.
Yeah, I mean, you know, trimming up fish, fins and you know, just
It's remarkably strong.
yeah, exactly. I mean, plastic shears, you know, compared to these plastic shears, you get so much torque and movement on these that the blades, you know, they start to misalign and then they dull each other out. And these just suck. You go through one of these maybe every year.
Yeah, and that's a Henkel too.
Yeah, it's a piece of shit. But a no name, actually, I'll leave a link to a newer one that I found. But same principle, just a solid, you know, something like this will last forever. And that is basically it.